Andrea, are you with us? It might be that Andrea is not.
Hello, yeah.
Okay.
I asked about the times when it's sunny and windy or windy, and there's more electricity generated than needed in the system. So that was my question for all.
Okay, so managing the intermittence.
Intermittency. Yeah. Intermittency, perfect. It's a complex question, and I get it a lot. So I'll try to sort of spend the next 1 minute or so going over what I typically answer. Now, there's no question that today no energy system can be powered by wind or by solar, for that matter, alone. Frankly, the sun doesn't shine at night, and you have days with overcast, and you do have days or even weeks with less, next to zero wind, at least in areas. What I tried to just do in the chat was to say, first of all, today in most places, wind and solar energy is relatively cheap. In fact, many places it's cheaper than building new capacity, for instance, thermal capacity, even cheaper than utilizing existing capacity. So, for instance, in Denmark or perhaps Germany, onshore and to some extent offshore wind is cheaper than actually burning coal or natural gas from existing installations if you factor in the carbon price of the ETS. So adding new wind or new solar capacity is, from a socio-economic point of view, no regret until a certain extent, sort of cap. Because it's simply cheaper to pour in electricity from wind when it does blow, when the wind does blow, rather than just not doing so. That can take most markets into a rather large penetration of either wind or solar in combination. What happens when you then go above 100% installed capacity to consumption? Well, then you do get into situations where you will have capacity installed to back up your system. But you have that today as well. It's not as if any electricity system in the world is built to just generate enough electricity as is needed in the most power intensive hour of the year. In Denmark, for instance, I think we have around 9 or 10 gigawatts of installed capacity, whereas our electricity need maxes out at around 6. So there is backup capacity in the grid, and that backup can be converted into renewable energy as well, using, for instance, bioenergy sources like that. Thirdly, building out transmission lines between markets greatly affects and benefits the power system and the ability to integrate renewable energy. Denmark as well. I'm sorry, I'm from Denmark, so this is the example that I typically return to. We are very well connected to our neighbors to the north and to the south. Now, to the north, Sweden and Norway, we are blessed with having a rather large amount of renewable hydro storage, but it doesn't have to be hydro storage. It could be anything, really. The point is that the longest transmission lines we see today are perhaps 1,500 kilometers. We are about to connect ourselves to the UK, for instance. But large weather systems today are around 1,500, 2,000 kilometers in diameter. So if it's windy in the Irish Sea, we can receive some of that wind here in Denmark via cables to the UK on a day where it's less windy here. And as well, when it's windy here, we can send some of the energy back. So integrating between markets across longer distances is crucial going forward beyond 2030. And that's something that we have a quite big focus on in Ørsted, trying to promote and push for better integration between European countries, for instance. Fourthly, and this is my final point, battery technology is not at a place today where we can just build a large grid scale battery and then just save days and days of electricity for when the sun isn't shining or the wind isn't blowing. That wouldn't be economically feasible. What we can do, however, is start to implement, for instance, renewable hydrogen production at large scale. That gives us the ability to produce a lot of hydrogen when the wind is actually blowing more than typically, and then scale down on the production of hydrogen when the wind isn't blowing as much. Meaning that if you have say 3 or 4 times the amount of wind generation that you actually need, then even on relatively calm days, the wind will generate enough to basically cover your needs, together with perhaps a bit of transmission and a bit of backoff based on, for instance, bioenergy. And then the rather large amount of time where the wind is actually blowing rather forcefully, that excess energy will be converted into hydrogen, which will be needed when we have to decarbonize our industries and when we have to decarbonize our heavy transportation. So not to use the hydrogen as a storage to convert back into electricity, but to use a rather large-scale hydrogen production integrated in the grid as a spring or a buffer that can sort of flexibly scale up and down to provide the base load from wind or solar to be provided into the regular power grid. Sorry, that was a long explanation. I hope it did to some extent answer the question.
Thank you, Magnus. Sarah, do you want to add anything on?
Well, I think that Magnus said it all. I completely agree. So looking at the chat, of course, that we believe that this is a process. So this is something that we are all learning as we are doing. What I meant was, in fact, what we've seen until today, things are coming, are suddenly faster than we were expecting. So I'm not so sure that all the scenarios that we are seeing today will be the things that but this is I'm not talking science now, okay? I'm just saying that because of what we've been seeing from the last decade, what the technology could evolve much faster than we were expecting. And so we all as society were able to imagine solutions and put it in place and test them much faster than we all expected. You can see about the hydrogen and renewable hydrogen. That is something that we started talking 3, 4, 5 years ago, but suddenly it became really possible. There's a lot of people looking at it, studying it, pushing costs down, scaling this deployment. So I really believe that everything that it has been said, it's true. And we still think that gas will be needed for backup purposes. We need to have some power plants to be able to fit this the storage that does not exist, because the short run, yes, as the chat was mentioning, and Magnus was, the seasonal storage is the most worrying one. So we are talking about the seasonal, that's the worrying one. But I really believe that what we will see is this ecosystem moving faster towards a total decarbonized solution, because the whole society is putting their efforts on it. So this is what I meant when I said that I believe that storage would come faster or earlier than what you see. It's more in this kind of vision, but technically Magnus said it all really well.
Thank you, Sarah. We had another question from Facebook, also from Magnus, and I think you already answered in the chat, but I will just read out the question again and invite you to share your answer with all of us here. So the question was, what was the role factor of your government on local legal of your government and local legal frame? Did it support allow your transformation? What is your experience in other countries on the same topic? So the support of government.
Now, Ørsted is, as I mentioned, still owned by the Danish government. At least 51% of our shares are on government hands, and so they are sort of a veto player when it comes to our strategy. Typically, they take a rather laid-back approach. They condone, but they don't actually engage. Now, there are several aspects of the story. I guess I'll start with the one that's probably the most relevant to you guys, which is our phase out of coal. Back in 2012 in Denmark, we had a sort of a center-left government, and there was a political agreement to start and replace coal from our power plants with biomass. And I know biomass is a whole other can of worms. It's a large discussion in the EU right now whether or not it's actually sustainable to use biomass for heat and electricity generation. We at Ørsted consider ourselves rather progressive when it comes to ensuring that the biomass we actually do source is certified and sustainably sourced. But in 2012, there was a rather large agreement in the Danish parliament to promote the use of biomass for energy purposes. In Denmark, we have a rather efficient district heating system. So traditionally, the main part of our electricity has been generated from large power plants, and that has been combined with basically district heating, where we can utilize the excess heat from the power stations. And so those were quite easily converted, in fact, from, when I say quite easily, we did of course invest several billion Danish kroners in it, but they can be converted from burning coal into burning something else. That was a governmental decision that we then reacted on. Later, when it comes to coal, there's a bit of noise in my background here. I'm sorry if it's too disturbing. I'll keep it short. Okay. Later, the government actually imposed plans to phase out coal entirely in Denmark by 2030. Then a changing government reneged on that policy and actually allowed the burning of coal beyond 2030. The year after, we made, and Ørsted owns and operates 5 of the 7 largest power stations in Denmark. We made our our own commitment to sort of phase out coal by 2023, simply because we saw it as economically viable. And then the government again opted to committing to a complete phase out by 2030. So it has been sort of a zigzag approach to some extent. When it comes to offshore wind, that was definitely a result of government support, both in Denmark and in other markets. The UK, the Netherlands, and Germany have been especially vocal in their promoting offshore wind. And frankly, the technology wouldn't be where it is today without the government support we received over the last decade or so. And when I say we, I mean the industry as a whole. Now, I agree with Sarah that hydrogen is an upcoming and extremely promising technology. We do, however, expect that, just as with offshore wind, policy support will be necessary with, for instance, hydrogen and power-to-X technologies to make them mature in time to actually make an impact on the climate. Again, long story. Sorry, I give the floor.
Sarah, would you also like to add your perspective on this issue of how the role of the government, the local legal frame, how it supported the transfer?
Yeah, thank you. It's important for governments to have a kind of support. Yes, normally the support is on technologies that are promising, like H2 that Magnus just mentioned, and that will play a key role in this situation on decarbonization. And for that, on the onshore wind, well, almost 20 years ago, the Portuguese government supported the technology itself, not the companies, but the technology. There were some feed-in tariffs, and there were a lot of discussions of who should be paying those, the inequalities, the competitive advantages or disadvantages that the industry could have, the perspectives on that. So I think that the discussion existed, the government supported the technology, and the outcomes of that we will be seeing, maybe for the first time in several years, a potential of an electricity price decreasing, which is something that we never thought about it. So I think that we will be seeing this paying off, the feed-in tariffs that were supporting the industry 20 years ago. And so hopefully when society understands that this pays off, all this kind of support that governments will give to hydrogen, for example, which is a discussion under the EU Green Deal, is seen as something good, because the society as a whole understands that this is an investment that will pay off. Not only in these big technologies, I think there's still a big role to play on the grid side. Grids are very regulated, and interconnections, like Magnus were saying, it's very important for governments to commit themselves and among themselves. So that's a very important role they need to play, and to understand that all this transition requires a very resilient network. I think it's also important to take that in consideration. And in sectors such as the transport sector, when we are talking about infrastructuring, the EV fleets, the charging, so all the requirements around the infrastructures, that we'll have to see that we're not expecting direct support, but there are some regulations that need to be redesigned. So a lot of the role that the government needs to play is to better understand the challenges on regulation and how they need to change regulation to allow all these new ecosystems and being in place, because everything is moving very fast. Every day a new challenges is being raised. Until last year, we wanted to be able to add a solar panel in our roof and share with my neighbor. We couldn't do that. There was no regulation. So governments need to be very aware of where to move and when to be able to enhance all this transformation. And there are a lot of challenges, yes.
Thank you, Sarah. There was also an exchange. We've already discussed the issue of storage to some extent, because there was also a discussion on storage between Sarah and Magnus in the chat. So I would just like to ask Sarah from Ember if anything was left unsaid or unanswered so far, and if you have any additional questions on the storage issue that you raised in the chat.
Hi, everyone. No, I think it was very comprehensively answered by both Magnus and Sarah. So thank you for that.
Okay, thank you. We just had a new question that came in from Zala. I think it's a question or a comment, but Zala, you can share with all of us.
Yeah, it's not really a question, so it's more of a comment, mostly to the point that, that national policies are super important for also enabling coal utilities for the just transition, which I completely agree on. But the market forces are now already so strong that you can see in Poland, which is, generating electricity from coal at a rate of like 70 or 80% of the electricity comes from coal. We see private companies that don't have the benefit of having a lot of subsidies coming in from the taxpayer already moving beyond coal by 2030, so the Paris compatible kind of end date to coal, just because they're private companies understanding economics. And ZEPAC, for instance, has a few plants and a few mines, and even planned a new mine last year, and this year had to just due to preventing a bankruptcy, do a U-turn, announce the 2030 coal phase out. And what is also significant is that they will transform to a renewables company. and also enable set up a training facility for their workers to kind of retrain them into renewables. So creating green jobs for their own workers. Obviously, there are also some, not so positive stories. So they had to really fire a few coal workers at the moment, but still the plans look quite good. And I'm just, sharing this because it's Poland, because it's the biggest lagger in coal discussion and coal exit. But even then, there on a coal utility side, things are moving ahead, and the coal utilities plan encouraged also the region where the utility is operating to go along with the just transition, and they declared a net zero goal for 2040. So it's a kind of not just a utility, but the whole region was moved because of that. So it shows how much of an, force the market has now, how things are intertwined. If you have a coal utility moving, you have also the region, following if in the best cases, and there's like also a positive vision that people can rally around. And if you have a good plans and you really look for creating a good transition for your own workers, things can work out well. So it's a start of the plan. So we'll see what happens, but for now the plans look really promising. So a long comment, sorry.
Thank you, Zala. But yeah, a relevant comment. If anybody else, we still have 10 minutes according to our official program. So if there are any more questions or comments on the topics that Magnus and Sarah touched on, please raise your hand in the chat. We still have time to answer perhaps two, 3 questions, let's say. Lan has raised his hand, so please.
Yeah, hi. I have a question for Magnus. I'm sorry, perhaps I didn't hear during your presentation, but did the company actually suffer any losses in profit during your transition into renewable energy? And if it did, how large was that loss, and how long did it take you to actually overcome it?
Thanks for the question. It's hard to make tangible our concrete losses. There's no doubt that we did have some stranded assets. It's not as if we have, for instance, actual power plants or actual oil and gas exploration facilities that we had to simply abandon. We were able to divest from some of it. For instance, our oil and gas business was divested in 2018. So I cannot give you a number. I can say that, for instance, we had one of the largest upcoming coal power plants in Europe, in Greifswald in northern Germany, that we have invested a significant amount of money into developing without actually having begun the construction, that we had to abandon the plans for in 2013, I believe. And that will probably have come at a cost of somewhere around 1 billion Danish kroner that we had simply invested into developing it. We decided to opt out because of we saw a rather large risk of venturing into a large new coal power plant. We saw the megatrends of climate change and renewable energy becoming cheaper and cheaper. And there was, to be frank, a quite extensive local we made a lot of I have to weigh my words here, but people were not quite pleased with it at the local region. So we had a lot of activists and stuff like that calling out against installing the power plant. So we opted to actually scrap the plans. There were also a point in time where we could have made a rather faithful decision to move into, for instance, a large portfolio of gas power plants in Netherlands that we opted not to invest in. That would probably have been quite significant loss. So we were to some extent fortunate that we were able to sell off some of the assets and that we opted not to invest in others. Unfortunately, I cannot give you a number because I simply don't know.
Thank you. Does anyone else have anything on their minds to ask or a pressing comment? Again, you can just raise your hand. I don't. Tomislav is raising his hand. So please.
Hello from my side, Tomislav Kalec from Focus Association for Sustainable Development, working in Ljubljana. I have questions for both of the presenters regarding questions how you dealt or how you managed to work with the employees, so with workers in your companies, and if there were unions, also with unions, because we know that when you work something and you're good at it, you don't want to change. So if you're good in activities related to coal, gas or oil, you would like to stick to it. And we see a lot of now in the discussion in Slovenia regarding the coal phase out, that the unions are actually the strongest opponents for the coal phase out. And I would like to see if you have any experience or you know about them, how it was in your companies. So how did you deal with workers? Did you have any special trainings for them? Were they involved in, I don't know, preparing the vision or the strategy of the company and so forth? Thank you.
Yeah, either of you can go first. And I think this will be our also closing question, it seems. Take your time.
Sarah, perhaps you would like to start?
Okay, thank you. Well, I don't have exact numbers and detailed information for you, but I can give you additional information if needed by email afterwards. Well, in fact, in Sinj, we are talking about 400 people that are in our coal power plant, but there different kind of contracts. Half of it belongs to the company, half of it doesn't belong to the company, so there are services being provided. So they are all those people who worked inside the company and with the company and with the value chain are mapped somehow. Internally with our employees, we were able to redistribute them. So I think that this process is still ongoing. I don't have detailed information of if it's going really well, if there are any challenges. I believe there are always challenges on here in this kind of situations, but nothing that it's critical somehow, because we were able to reallocate them, and a few of them or several of them, they're already old enough. So we are changing in the generation stage, which makes a difference. So I think that every situation is very local decided. But what we are doing is we are linking this vision to what can be a future projects on H2, for example. So what we are saying is we are organizing this at the region level with what we still have there. What can we do to, in the short coming years, be able to redirect and reinvest in the region through new renewables. So I think that most of the utilities that I know about are doing more or less the same thing. The Spanish government asked even for what they called an investment interest project. So all the utilities presented to the Spanish government what could be a future projects linked to renewables, and they will be decided and will be discussed under the new EU Green Deal and all these investments. And so I think that there are some consultation on that, and under these big programs, people will be more or less supported. But I can't give you small details on that. Apologies.
To quickly supplement, because I think Sarah pointed out a lot of the things that are also the case for our sake. Obviously, we had a large portfolio of people who were really good at building coal and gas-fired power plants and operating them. A lot of them we have retained because the power plants are still in operation. They have just shifted fuel. And in the future, we will retain the power plants and sort of transform them into what we call energy parks, where we will hopefully be able to situate, for instance, carbon capture and utilization and hydrogen production and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. So a lot of the colleagues we can actually keep and help. They can help us in the transition from fossil to other renewable energies. Obviously, when we divested from our oil and gas exploration business, the colleagues, they followed as well. But a lot of the colleagues can also be retrained, because the competences that you gain from being able to design and construct and operate a coal-fired power plant can be used in trading with energy, or in installing and project developing other energy generation assets.
Okay, we have, and this is, I think, really the final question. It comes from Andrea. So, Andrea, you can close out our Q&A.
Thank you. Yeah, I was just thinking if there's any information about the number of renewable energy jobs in initial setup and then ongoing, and payment in these jobs, because this could be maybe motivation for unions. I don't know, just an idea.
It's an excellent question, and it's really important that everyone is on board going forward. That's why just transition is one of the things that are the most hotly debated topic on, for instance, World Economic Forum Council, or the climate COPs and stuff like that. An offshore wind farm of 1 gigawatt generates around 9,000 full-time equivalent years over its total lifespan, with I guess 2/3 of that being within the first 3 or 4 years during construction. Regarding payment, I can't really say if that's better or worse than you would make in another sector, for instance, a fossil one, but they are definitely nice jobs, and we have a high sort of satisfaction between our employees.
Well, talking about satisfaction, we feel the same, and we feel that people feel very comfortable and engaged with working with companies that are doing this transition. So people are becoming really satisfied with the idea of belonging, of having a purpose. So that fits really well. I don't know much about the payments. I know that we are all facing a challenge, that it's not just due to just transition. It's a challenge that all the energy sector is facing, which is around skills and digitalization. I think it's a worldwide challenge, I would say. But in fact, there's a need of new skills. So the retrain people to be able, it's not just the wind farm that is being built, and comparing what was a coal power plant being managed. Of course, if you are talking, Sinj has 400 people, a wind farm has a huge, there are people working for construction during operation. It's much less intensive, but on the other hand, you need to scale that up so much that you really need to have new green jobs around that. But new jobs on all the ecosystem are required, and I think that's really important. And when you're looking on how the decentralized generation, the role that it's playing, that it's very human, I don't know how to say it in English, apologies, I was trying to say, but you really need people to work that in there with much more often than you have. So I don't think that it's very easy to compare exactly. People are not going to do the same. It's not the same kind of job. It's not shifting from coal to solar or coal to wind. It's shifting the total system. And this is where jobs and green jobs will really increase. But about the payments, I really don't know.
Thank you, Sarah, and thank you to everybody that joined today. Thank you to the presenters. Thank you to the audience. We realize that these sort of hour-long online events can be very taxing and tiring. So we appreciate you all taking the time. And I know I've really enjoyed it and hearing all the really dense and informative presentations. And I hope it made that the event made some valuable addition to the public now discussion around coal phase out in Slovenia, which will hopefully lead to also a political decision on a timely coal phase out that will go in line with the reality of the climate crisis. Yeah, so because at the end of the day, maybe going back to the beginning of our day, what we need to be seeing, of course, is a drop in emissions today and tomorrow. And in that sense, all the other angles that we addressed today, also particularly the economics of coal, the economics of renewables, is just let's say the changing energy landscape within which we are operating today, and which needs to be taken into account when making those responsible political decisions. So yeah, thank you again to everybody. As said, you will be receiving the presentations of the speakers in a separate email. To all the journalists that are perhaps still with us today, again, if you wish to have a one-on-one conversation please, with any of the speakers, let us know and we'll put you in contact. And we will be also sending out a brief press release tomorrow morning, the latest. So thank you to everybody and have a good rest of the day and a long lunch.
Thank you so much. Bye.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Bye to all.